and welcome back to another video on my channel. I hope everyone's having a fantastic day today. Today we are back with another build video, and I know it's been a while since I've uploaded a video. I've been working on some really big builds and I've been trying to decide when the right time to release them would be. Everything kind of went off track for a little while, but we finally are back with another build, and this is actually going to be a hospital build. I had another build planned to be released sooner, but I decided to release the hospital build first because if you guys didn't know, exactly a year ago to the date, I was actually in the emergency room for this intense pain. And I have told the story briefly before on my channel, so I'm not going to go too much into it, but basically I just had really bad pain and I ended up in the ER. This was last year around this time, and I ended up going back there a second time before I was actually admitted for them to figure out what was wrong. I've also had a few operations in my life, so a lot of the time I can kind of picture memories of when I went to the hospital, especially now with the anniversary since I've last been in the ER. I can vividly imagine how the hospital looked, how my rooms looked, how the cafeteria looked, and so I decided that I wanted to do a hospital build. If you actually play The Sims and you use a hospital, you don't need like half of the rooms that I decided to put in here. The only reason why I added a lot of the rooms is to somewhat be realistic, but in reality I doubt your Sims will actually use any of the rooms in the hospital. I did player test it, so if your Sim has a baby, they will be able to use the hospital just fine if you check in at the front desk, and they'll automatically go have the child like in any other game. I haven't tested it for the doctor career yet, but I'm assuming everything's fine, and I'm pretty sure I have all the rooms that you need for the hospital. I wrote down like an entire checklist to make sure that I had all of the rooms available, so I don't think there should be anything wrong, but if there is, you can always just edit this build. I will have instructions in the description in case you want to place this hospital in your build but you're not too sure how to do it. It is a bit tricky, it requires quite a few amounts of cheats, but if you just want to download the hospital just to play normally or to make your own storylines, then everything you need to know will be in the description down below. So the exterior of the build isn't based on anything specific. I just kind of googled a bunch of images of what the outside of a hospital look like, and I just meshed a bunch of them together. I also wanted to add some sort of parking lot because if you've ever been at a hospital, you know the parking is absolutely atrocious. Like, it is so difficult to get proper parking when you go and visit somebody in the hospital, or even when you need to go yourself. I was somewhat lucky. I don't know if you can say I was lucky when I went to the ER, but every time I went to the ER, both times, it was like the middle of the night, so there weren't many cars on the pavement, because the way that my hospital, or the hospital I went to, kind of worked is that there was like this long walkway to go to the emergency room, so you kind of had to park on the pavement. It wasn't like proper parking, so luckily there was always room. I don't know what I would have done if there wasn't any parking. I think I would have just like crumpled over in the car or something. I was in so much pain. But yeah, in this little hospital I decided I wanted to make a little parking lot. There's enough space for 3 cars, and 2 of those spaces are taken up because doctors need to park too. Originally I was going to do a normal parking lot, and then I was going to do a special one for the doctors, but then I was like, you know what, The Sims 4 doesn't even have workable cars at this stage. Don't know if we will ever have cars, but there's actually no reason to have a parking lot other than for it to look good, and I didn't want to take up a huge majority of the lot with something that you can't use, especially because there's so many rooms that I want to add in this build. So yeah, there's just like a little parking lot in front, which I thought was quite cute. I wanted to put reserved signs on there, but I decided not to go through the effort. Anybody can park there. I'm not going to be the person that says you can't park there if you need to go to the hospital. Other than that, there's not much that I did to the exterior. I just added in some plants to try and make the area look a bit more lively. Also added in a little bit of a fountain because I thought that would be pretty cute. The windows don't have much of an actual window. There's kind of boards up because it is a hospital, and I wanted to kind of give people privacy, especially considering where the windows are. The first room that we are going to be working on in the hospital is the reception area, and it is a bit of a weird one. It took me a while to figure out what I wanted to do with it. because even though I had a basic plan, I was still kind of going off the top of my head to try and figure out how I wanted it to look, because it was such a big space and I have a habit of trying to fill every part of a space, and that's something I really had to just let go with in this build. The reception desk is a bit off center, which is a bit annoying, but that's the way I had to do it in order to get the doors to fit. I also put in a map, which I believe was from City Living. I put it in the reception area, more with the idea that that's a map of the hospital, because it's such a big build, and normally when you go to a place like that, there is some sort of map or design so that you can figure out where you need to go, which floor is on where. Above the reception area, there is a part where you can kind of look down, and that is going to be a little cafeteria area. There is going to be a public area for people to go and get food, more like a business place, and then a small little kitchenette for the doctors themselves, because they also need to eat and they deserve their privacy. So I decided a little kitchenette would be the best thing to do. In the cafeteria area, there is a way for people to get coffee. I feel like that's something a lot of people do when they have a loved one in hospital. They tend to get coffee when it's not visiting hours, then they have to sit and wait anyway, so might as well get something to drink. I know a lot of hospital cafes also have selection of cakes. I know there's this one hospital where my dad used to be, and they always had like the best cake, so whenever we were going to visit him, we'd always get a slice of cake. And so I was like, okay, let me put some of those cake display stands in this cafeteria as well. So over here we are working on a place for the actual patients to stay. This little area is based off of the emergency room, the way that I remembered it. The first time I ended up going to the emergency room, I was actually in my own little private room, which was actually quite nice. The second time, however, was one of those days. The ER was completely filled up, and so they just took me into a room with a bunch of other patients. Already just being admitted into hospital for a second time made me extremely anxious, but I think the reason why it was even worse this time was because I was in a room with so many other patients. There was actually a capacity with the amount of people that they allowed in the room, which meant that my sister, the person who actually took me to the ER, she couldn't sit with me. This other guy managed to sneak his wife in there, so I'm glad that he had a great 3 hours, but I was sitting there without my sister, extremely anxious and lonely, and my sister was such a star. She literally just sat in the waiting room for like all of those hours, and we would text messages every now and again. She sent me like little sunflower emojis. Like, she's just so precious. Not only could I not have my sister in the same room as me, when I took off my shoes to get on the hospital bed, I realized I was wearing two completely different socks. And when I say that, I'm not just saying like, oh, one was black and one was blue. I mean, one was a knitted sock and the other one was just a random black sock. And they decided that the best place to put me was right in front of the open door, so every person that walked past could look over and see my unmatched socks. I even remember looking over at this woman like right in front of me, talking to one of the nurses, and she seemed so upset. Like, obviously she had been through something, and she looked over and saw my socks, and she tried so hard not to laugh out loud. And I was like, you know what? That's fine. If I can bring a smile to somebody else's face, I'm okay with that. Even though it was like really embarrassing for me, I get some sort of pride knowing that I managed to make someone else smile just by like having two different colored socks. Because in my defense, I didn't plan on going to the ER, did I? So there was no reason for me to wear the same type of socks that night, because I thought I was just going to go to bed and everything was going to be fine, but I was wrong. And now a bunch of nurses and a bunch of people that I will probably never see again in my life just know that I wear two different socks, and my secret is out. The next room that we are going to be working on is going to be the actual like patient rooms, so not the emergency room area. This single room is actually another one that I'm basing off of one of the ones that I was admitted in. After I kept having all of these really bad pains, I said, listen, something's wrong, and something was wrong, so they finally properly booked me into the hospital so that I could be treated, and I got my own little room, which was really cool. I tried to mimic it for what I can kind of remember. You'll see in this build that I tried to add like a side desk, and that was to represent this little tray that they put your food on. I couldn't figure out how to mimic something like that in The Sims 4. It's just none of the objects I had could really fit with it, so I decided to put a table there and to kind of pretend like you could just slip it on. The other two rooms that I am using for patients each have 3 beds in it. These rooms I'm basing off of a different experience I had when I was admitted into hospital. I was about to have a surgery, or I did have a surgery, and I was in a room with 3 other girls, so they were actually 4 beds. I decided for this hospital I was going to just do the rooms with the 3 beds, otherwise it would have been too packed, and there's quite a few items that I wanted to fit in the room, but I didn't want it to be too claustrophobic, so I narrowed it down to 3 beds. I didn't want to put privacy screenings everywhere, so instead I just put up some curtains to kind of give the illusion like you can close the curtains for some privacy. Even though it doesn't actually work, it's The Sims, they don't actually care if there's privacy or not. For each of the beds I did make sure that they had what they needed to have, so next to every bed they have an end table, they have an IV holder, I'm not sure what it's called, but the place for your IV. They have the cabinets. Above the bed there's a bunch of light switches, which looks ridiculous, I'll admit that, but I was trying to mimic how there's a bunch of like outlets above your bed and a bunch of switches and everything. I couldn't figure out how to properly mimic that, so instead I just used a bunch of light switches. I know why I put it there, even though it looks a bit weird. Another thing that I did is that I took one of the TVs and I sized it down because I needed a monitor where you can read vitals, and in the emergency room I put a bunch of registers because it kind of looks like the device that they use to take blood pressure and stuff, but in the Sims game obviously they will recognize that as a register. Next we are going to be doing the main bathrooms, which is the shared little area. You walk into the bathroom and there are the sinks, and then you have the individual stalls that each have a toilet and I think a dustbin maybe. I also just quickly go back and I add some accents to some of the walls because even though it was a hospital it was looking a bit too white for me, so I added a green accent to a lot of the walls. I also built a little shower area. I would have loved to have had just a shower head. I think maybe we get that in one of the expansion packs. I'm not sure, but obviously I don't own it, so we have like proper showers in a few of the rooms. I also decided to add a bar to the side of the toilets because a lot of the bathrooms in hospitals do have that for people who have trouble sitting down or standing up. We then move on to the more private bathrooms that are attached to one of the rooms. Realistically, it would have been smarter to kind of divide up those private bathrooms, but I was already too far in with the build, so I just decided, you know what? This one room is gonna have 2 private bathrooms attached to it, and I'm okay with that. There's nothing really too special when it comes to these bathrooms. It's basically the same as any bathroom. It has a bath, a shower, everything that you would need. I know that sometimes when it comes to private rooms you have nurses that are able to help you, so I didn't really feel the need to put any safety guards up, and it just kind of looks like a normal bathroom. Next up we are moving to the staff wing, and we are starting with doing bathrooms for them, just so that it's separated from the rest of the bathrooms that the patients can use. I feel as though it's only fair to have private bathrooms for the doctors. Next to their bathrooms we have a locker room where doctors can change into their uniforms or whatever doctors do. I don't know, I got most of these ideas off of TV shows, so I don't know how accurate it actually is. Next up we are going to be doing a file room to keep all of the patients' records. I added in a lot of boxes and a lot of file cabinets so that it looks like there has been a lot of patients in the past. I can imagine that keeping all of that information can take up a lot of space, so that's what I was trying to do, but I also wanted it to be a bit organized, so I decided to use some of these shelves that ended up working quite well. Next up we have more of a study research room in case doctors need to research something at the last minute. We also have a little room in the corner which is quite bare. It's just a place for doctors to grab some sleep if they're working like an 18-hour shift or something. And the last room in the wing is a little exercise room. For some reason the doctors need one, so I decided to add one to the lot. We moved downstairs and these are 2 of the doctor's offices, so it's more like consultation rooms. They are basically the same. I tried to make it a little bit different, mostly because of the sizing area. The one room is a lot bigger than the other one, so I was able to fit in a lot of stuff, and so it was a little bit different, but overall pretty much the same thing. The room right next to that actually has a massage table in, and I know it sounds weird, but when they were trying to diagnose what was wrong with me, I remember being taken into like this weird dark room, and I laid down flat on a bed, and I remember this woman said, "Where does it hurt?" And I showed her, and she proceeded to constantly poke me while I was laying on this table, and I couldn't do anything about it other than just cry out in pain. We also have x-ray rooms. Attached to the x-ray room there is a monitoring room, I don't know what you call it, but I made use of the one-way glass. I mean, I don't get to use that very often, so I thought it was a pretty cool thing to do. And because of the one-way window, I also decided to put a little privacy screening in, just so that if somebody needs to get changed, they don't have to worry about anybody seeing anything. Next up, we are busy working on a mini laboratory / electrical room. I wanted a space where you could work with different samples, do different types of analysis and stuff. A lot of those things are necessary if you want to play the doctor's career with the Get to Work expansion pack, so I needed somewhere to put it, but I also decided to combine it with the electrical room, because even though you don't really need an electrical room, I thought it would be pretty cool to have one in a hospital, because a hospital is so big, it does need a lot of power, it does generate a lot of things, and there are these beware of electrical signs that I've always wanted to use, and I felt as though this is probably the best way to do it, so I decided to also add those in. I'm just going around at the moment adding a few small details to the hallways, including seating area as well as different signs, to try and make it seem a little bit more realistic. Once we're done putting some seating in the hallway and just finishing up with some of the signs, we are going to be moving on to the next room, which is going to be the NICU. This is the only room where there is glass in the hallway where you can see into the room, because I feel like in a lot of movies you're able to look into the NICU. I haven't really experienced this in person. I've never really seen any sort of room like this in person, so everything that I'm doing is based off of movies and TV series, so if it's not accurate then I apologize. In this room I decided to add these baby bassinets, and I don't think they're actually usable, which I'm okay with. If your sim has a baby at this hospital, a new crib will be generated, so the baby won't appear in this unit. Everything still works perfectly fine, nothing else was bugged, which I'm really glad about. And in this room I also decided to add a little bit of a kids area, as well as some cribs, even though I doubt they will ever be used. I don't think that toddlers can come to this lot at all, so the cribs are basically useless. It's just there for decoration. The next room we'll be working on is the scrubbing room, and I remember looking up the name for this room and I can't for the life of me remember what it is, but basically it's a room with a bunch of sinks, and I also put some aprons there to kind of represent some scrubs. This is going to be the room you go into before surgery. This is where you go to prepare for it. So there's some medical instruments that have just been sterilized, sitting ready to go, and that was kind of the whole idea with this mini room, which then leads into the operating room, which is the room we're working on right now. As you can see, it's the operating table. There is another TV for vitals, and I was just trying to put some clutter in, but I couldn't really figure out what really suited it. This room ended up being a lot more bare than I wanted it to be, but I couldn't really find any other decorations that suited the operating room, and sometimes less is more, so I'm quite happy with that. We also just finished off with the treadmill area. Again, very bare, there's basically nothing in that room. Last thing that we're doing is that we're just going around the room and doing some small touches, so just adding a few decorations as well as adding a rail to the stairs. That's basically the build. Here we have the screenshots of all of the different rooms. Some of the rooms are basically just duplicates of the others, so I decided not to show that many screenshots when you can basically get the idea just by seeing these. Obviously, with it being a year anniversary since I was rushed to the ER, it was really weird rebuilding the hospital and just weird reliving these memories, but I'm really glad that I did it, because in a way I took something that was really negative in my life and turned it into a positive and created something I loved out of it. So I'm really glad with this build. If you guys are interested in downloading this build, all the information you need will be in the description down below. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe so that you're notified every time I post a new video. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye guys!